I'm honored to be here today, leading us into an exciting panel of experts that will discuss the critical nature of emergency planning and response. Our audience represents an extraordinary diversity of roles, responsibilities, and skill sets, all with the same mission, keeping our schools and our communities as safe as can be. For some of us, hearing the term emergency planning might recall a time when a fire drill and making sure we shut the windows, doors, and the lights off was challenging. However, largely driven by significant events, when we look back over the last 25 years, the need and expectation for our school administrators to evolve into more strategic, emergency, and security-minded thinkers has never been greater. It's important to understand that whether you're a school administrator, school resource officer, local first response organization, school emergency planning is a shared responsibility. It truly takes a village to create prevention and preparedness plans, resilience, confidence, and ultimately meaningful training programs while balancing what seems to be limitless competing priorities. Complicating all of this is the need to remain contemporary, continually assessing and reassessing risks and identifying the most responsible use of resources. This has become more and more of a challenge as the threat landscape shifts. However, our school leaders are constantly facing pressure to identify and implement the next best thing while considering endless what-if scenarios that sometimes drives decision-making more out of fear and anxiety rather than based on risk and practicality. There's no doubt that as a society, we have a greater ability to innovate and greater capability to identify mitigation and prevention tools through the use of systems and technology. But I draw a parallel to General Colin Powell, who said that leaders should not blindly follow the latest management trends. In these cases, sometimes speed to market and rushing to be first, while often well-intentioned, can create more security theater than actual prevention, while draining finite resources and in some cases, create new vulnerabilities. As I travel the country and speak with school leaders, I often hear how difficult it is for them to respond to and ultimately manage the response to what truly is a wide range of known and unknown threat events. Ultimately, when we peel back the onion a bit, it becomes clear that the difficulties most commonly revolve around three main elements: communication, organization, and leadership, or the tragic trio, as we might say. When communications are not bidirectional, both horizontal and vertical, it can undermine school leadership. Simultaneously, failures of interdepartmental organization can confuse communications and sometimes indicate a conflict within leadership. Most importantly, failures of leadership will often produce disorganization, miscommunications, and ineffective incident management. It cannot be stated enough that commitment to planning, partnership building, and taking advantage of your community resources helps build a prepared school. But as I mentioned, this is not solely the responsibility of our school leaders. It is one that is shared amongst the many stakeholders here today. Unfortunately, we've all seen far too many examples of what can only be considered poor response. In some cases, it may be a result of poor planning, an inability to communicate, training, resource management, or the unknown knowns, such as what we see with the growing concern of anonymized threats challenging school leaders and first responders, particularly that of swatting. So today, before we get to the expert panel that will address several of these key points in detail, I want to look at a successful example of response at a statewide level and leave us with positive thinking. In 2023, the state of Vermont experienced 21 calls related to active shooter situations in the same day. These calls were for both public and private schools from north to south, beginning around 8 a.m. In a state such as Vermont, these near simultaneous threats could easily overwhelm response resources, create panic and fear in the communities, and stress school leaders, parents, and others. The sophistication of how these actors operate can exacerbate anxiety. For example, in several cases, the phone numbers of the callers were spoofed to appear as local 802 exchange numbers in an attempt to add legitimacy and mask origin. During these events, some students and parents stated they were confused by the reports and actions because their school had recently gone through active threat drills. As you would expect, parents called local police and school administrators asking for information. However, largely as a result of efforts put in place years earlier by the Vermont Agency of Education in collaboration with the Vermont Department of Public Safety, including the State Police and Emergency Management, the statewide communication and collaboration was coordinated and crossed many traditional barriers that challenge response. More accurately, it avoided the pitfalls of the tragic trio I mentioned earlier: communication, organization, and leadership. Vermont was able to effectively assess these threats, provide coordinated response and communications to affected schools, and frankly, an entire state that was asking questions about their children's safety while appropriately communicating with state elected officials and leaders. Principals activated their emergency plans and communication protocols and worked collaboratively to assess the credibility of the threats, consult with law enforcement, and inform the community with timely, accurate, and useful information. Did everything go right? Of course not. Very rarely, especially with a large-scale, multi-jurisdictional response, will everything be perfect. But one thing is for sure, the after-action report revealed many more planning strengths than it did weaknesses, allowing those involved to focus their efforts on closing gaps and seizing opportunities to perform even better when the next challenge, whatever it may be, raises its head. You're going to hear more examples of positive effects of planning, training, and collaboration today. It's important for everyone to remember, you are not alone. Resources continue to support these efforts from local, state, and federal partners, and every effort is being made to make them readily available and easy to access and implement.